when I got you speaking, I said, and next year, and I didn't have no plan. I said, and next year, I'm taking youth and veterans to the Arctic Circle. And I got a standing ovation. Then my partner looked at me and says, Chad, what the hell?
Welcome back to the Unfiltered Outdoors podcast. We missed y'all. Kenny, you just got back from a trip in Texas, so give us some of the details. Heard you had a great time. It's really cool things happened down there.
Man, Texas was a wild trip. We're in the middle of nowhere, just near the border, and a lot of people had a lot of success. Got some great footage, some some conversations that seem to be a little tense. People have some ideas about what is okay in the outdoors, what's not, what people should do and shouldn't have to do to eat meat. It was a good time. It was like a dream come true as a filmmaker, get to film some successful hunts. And then I myself had a successful hunt in the last 2 hours, and it ended up me staying up all night processing this animal in a Buc-ee's parking lot. And it was a good time. It was a super good time.
Wherever it happens. All right. Well, so we're so pumped to hear from and learn from our guest today. We're going to talk about everything from outdoor art to conservation, the Arctic Circle, and advocacy. You're not hearing from just a guest today. You're hearing from an absolute force in our space. He's an award-winning photographer and filmmaker, a Navy veteran, a conservationist, and an entrepreneur. This is a man who has led over 30 expeditions into the Arctic Circle and is the only Black person to hold a backcountry guide permit for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. He's been a strong voice before Congress to protect public lands, and as the founder of Soul River Inc. and Love is King, he has helped veterans and youth of color find healing on rivers and forest and in places most people only dream about. What an honor it is to welcome to the Unfiltered Outdoors podcast, Chad Brown. Chad, welcome, man.
Hey guys, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to taking a deep dive and seeing where these conversations go. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just want to kind of start, just in reading your background, like there's a big blend. There's military service, there's, art, there's conservation and advocacy. So is there a defining moment when the outdoors became less of a recreation for you and more about purpose?
Hmm. I think that that defining moment between less of recreation and outdoor purpose started right at the a part of my life when I was dealing with heavy PTSD as a combat vet, Navy, and that transition in that process connected me to the river, tied to fly fishing, and that became a bridge of that ramped me up for through healing and then through purpose.
Did you know when you first set out to get on the river and fly fish that it was going to do that, or was that just like a lucky moment break? Because I feel like for me, finding out that the healing powers of nature was random.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. There was. It's kind of like, I don't know if my story is the same with a lot of combat vets, and so circumstances, really dark circumstances that I was dealing with. Just can't paint the picture. I was like, at that time in my life, I was like literally homeless, living out of my rig. And I made I just came out of the hospital from attempted suicide on the river, local river, right outside of Portland, in the Estacada area on the Clackamas River. And when I was founded, with my revolver, about to take my life, I basically blacked out. The cops found out I was a combat vet, took me to the hospital, the VA hospital, ended up doing some time in the psych ward. And then from there was when I connected with this woman who crossed my path. And even though I was homeless, et cetera, but she basically, we became friends. And so she took me to the river, ironically took me right back to the Clackamas River. And she said, this is where I used to come and fly fish. when I was going through my divorce. And so here I am standing glassy eyed and teared on the riverbank full of heavy medications that the VA has given me. And I just said in a really like basically a light voice, I said, well, what do you have to do to get into fly fishing? And right behind me happened to be a sportsman's store. And so we walked in there. She showed me which rod to get and came out of there. And she showed me how to tie my first fly. And I didn't know anything about casting. I cast out a couple times and that didn't happen. And then I ended up casting. I hooked it on a small jack salmon and I was hooting and hollering all on top of the river, and that was when I was feeling this ooze of life coming out of my pores, and because this is a time and period that I was going probably on my fifth, sixth year of struggling with heavy PTSD and homeless. And so I completely like bleaked out of society from my past, and a lot of the work I done, became invisible, just like a lot of vets. And then um, that brought me back to reality. And then when I brought that to the VA hospital, the docs basically wrote me a prescription to stay in the outdoors as much as I can. And the more you stay, the more we'll wean you off the medications. And that's pretty much kind of like what I did. And so I kind of stayed close to the outdoors and I pursued fly fishing, and that became my community. That community opened up to conservationists, biologists, anglers, all walks of life, and I just became a pupil all over again of learning just the whole art of fly fishing and what is it like to get out there. And that whole process was my healing process that brought me into this next chapter of my life, was starting my purpose, basically. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, incredible. There's something that I would love for you to touch a little bit more on, because it's a conversation that we have often within Hunters of Color, and it's that a lot of times that people don't see women as mentors in the space, or they can't see women or refuse to see women as mentors in the space. But just in you telling your story, like it was a woman that said, "Hey, this
Yeah.
is where I used to fly fish when I was going through my divorce." So talk about like how important that was for you, for her to be that person to take that step.
You know, I actually didn't really see her as, I guess, to put on the pedestal as a woman. She was a woman, but it wasn't really about that. She knew fly fishing. She shared the sport with me, and really, it was much more looking at her as a leader teaching a pupil, a leader teaching a student, basically, right, and so
Yeah.
I didn't see gender at that time, but I'm definitely support, all women, before fly fishing, I'm in the archery and bow, and it was my mother to put a bow in my hand, and so, when I was, I don't know, like 5, 6 years old, to keep my butt from getting, in trouble, she put a bow in my hand, and that was how I was able to stay out of trouble, you know. And I would go to the archery range with my mom. My mom would shoot, and I would get right next to my mom, and she would teach me how to shoot. And the older I got, she put me into classes and started, to learn proper archery, etc. But it was my mom that gave me that influence and that connecting to the outdoors. And of course, my dad played a role in my life as well, though. But yeah, it was my mom that did that.
Yeah. So I mean, what I would say to our listeners is that, like, don't be afraid to look in your circle and where you're at, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what gender they are. Like, be ready to take help and mentorship from anybody that's in your circle willing to give it. I mean,
Absolutely.
like Chad just talked about, being really at the edge of his life. And it was a mentor who came along and said, "Hey, let me teach you how to fly fish."
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's saved Chad's life.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is how, when we are able to see the advice of another leader sharing, it's also our responsibility of checking our I would say, like, our meter of humbleness, and being able to put that in check, right? Because there's a lot of egos out there, and ego is definitely have always been a driver to many different things in what we pursue. And sometimes ego doesn't really give enough space for someone to step in to learn. And so when we can check ourselves on that meter ego and bring that meter down to a humbleness, it definitely opens up a bigger, larger space for us to be able to learn and make mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes, right? And then build from there and learn from there, So definitely being able to check our meter and being able to gauge that is our responsibility when we come across a leader that has the ability to give back and share, basically.
Yeah, you came from needing that leadership to then turning around and providing that leadership for so many people. So talk to us about like the beginning steps of Love is King, kind of where you've been along that journey and where you're headed.
Yeah, wow, the beginning step of Love is King, that opens up another dynamic. And because it all, I think like, when we move through life and are when we're thrown different types of angles and hurdles for us to do. Some of them are positive, some are negative, but it really comes down to all about how we manage that and how we're able to think through that process. It's like a chess game, being strategic in our moves. And I'm saying that because when you said the beginnings, Love is King, come from a really, really dark circumstance. It was actually birthed. I was actually on the river here in Oregon fly fishing. And this was right after the George Floyd. There was a guy, Caucasian guy, that stepped into the water. He's probably like a football field length in front of me. I mean, beside me downriver and upriver, excuse me. And then he told me to get off his river. And so I said, to him, I said, no, I'm not getting off your river. This is not your river. You don't own this river. And I just, we had some back and talking. So he took his firearm and he shot out, and warning shot basically to scare me. I was out there with my service dog axe. And so it kind of started me a little bit, but I moved downriver away from him further. And he did not like that. And then he took his revolver and he basically pointed and to shoot at me, and he missed me, of course, so that freaked me out. I ran, ducking and dodging through the woods, getting off the river, et cetera, trying to get back, et cetera, but there was a process I had to go through, and I had to go through a lot of therapy just to get myself back in check, of getting over that, but as I was getting over that and coming out to the end, I've always wondered why my mother and my father would be a little bit uncomfortable for me going into the outdoors by myself. Don't knowing that never really crossed my mind, but I used to think my mom and them was crazy. But because I never really had that fear. But now that I have experienced that and just being an outdoorsman and well-rounded in survival backcountry, I was faced with that. I was faced with my life, and so when I started to think about that, I started opening and asking some questions to some colleagues, et cetera. And those conversations started to grow really, really big. There was a lot of people beyond me that on all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, et cetera, that does have a tied fear to the outdoors. It's not animals, it's people. It's people that has a different type of intention when they're out there, basically, And so that was the beginning and the birth of Love is King, and so that circumstances turned into an organization to where it was important to be able to raise the flag on the mission of Love is King to make sure that outdoor spaces are created for all people, and it's definitely created for people of color to be able to explore the backcountry and just right outside your door, and with the dismantling of hate, bigotry, ignorance, and racism in the outdoors. Period. Everyone has an undeniable human right to explore, to have fun, to engage, and to bring their families out. And so the birth of Love is King was centered around that, and then it grew a little bit much more and focused into programs and what I do. But those programs started to be birthed into creating leaders, working with a diverse group of leaders from the ages of 19 all the way up to 65 years old. And those leaders are cultivated in the teams, and those teams are positioned, and sent to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I use the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as my classroom. Period. I've been going up there for like 25. I've done a little bit over 30 expeditions though, but I've been going up there, I would say, for the last 9, 10 years. That came from Soul River Inc., built off the platform. And so my relationships runs deep with the indigenous communities of the Nupiat Nation and the Gwich'in Nation. I have explored in the Arctic, Western Hemisphere, and then also on the other side of the U.S., the Arctic as well. And so, that's a big place, is a really phenomenal place, and it's a beautiful place to establish and grow new leaders for tomorrow around the sensitivity and the issues that are happening in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Gwich'in communities.
The wild thing about it from oh sorry, yeah, the wild thing about it for me is thinking about the fact that you went from, you're talking about being able to go out in your own back door, right? Like being able to be outside on rivers that are close by
Right.
and in the backcountry, and then you choose the most wild, biggest, terrifying landscape to take people into. Tell
Right.
us about like what goes on out in the Arctic, T. Why did you choose the Arctic? Tell us about that journey there.
Well, you know what? I chose the Arctic, and it's always been something to me, and it's always been kind of like a big attractor to me. But it actually started with my first organization, Soul River Inc., working with youth and vets. And I was speaking at Patagonia, and when I got through speaking, I this was many years back. When I got through speaking, I said, and next year, and I didn't have no plan. I said, and next year, I'm taking youth and veterans to the Arctic Circle. And I got a standing ovation. Then my partner looked at me and says, Chad, what the hell? you know, where did that come from? Where are you going to get the money? How are we going to get there? What are we going to do? And I said, don't worry about it. We'll find a way, and I think a lot of my work is actually walking in faith too. I'm a big believer, and I know that, when I'm doing the right thing and I'm lining up the right people, etc., I don't have to find answers. I don't need to have the answers right now. It's going to happen because just the fact that what you're doing for the greater good, it happens. It's just a formula that works. It does require sacrifice and patience. It requires a stamina of being able to sustain the test of time and be able to see it through. But it works, and so that was my method at that time. No plan, no strategy, and everything like that. And so as I proceed to figure this out, and I made a promise to the youth and vets, and I didn't have a plan. And so a lot of doors closed in front of me. And it goes back to being able to sustain yourself, right? And so, a lot of doors closed and many doors closed. And so I got to a point when I said, you know what? I called up a couple buddies of mine in the Navy, and I said, hey, do you think you could fly a C-130 into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and drop off some youth and vets? And they said, yeah, we could treat it as an exercise, and everything. And so they heard there was this crazy guy that was thinking about trying to get youth and vets into the Arctic. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife contacted me, and that's how I got in contact with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And they wanted to understand what was my mission and what was I trying to accomplish with my organization, And so got off the phone with that, and then I get a knock on the door at my office in Portland, Oregon, and it was a gentleman by the name of Barry, and he came and he says, listen, I heard what you're trying to do. Can I talk with you? And I said, yeah. So we went back, sat down on the table, and he said to me, I think you need a fairy godmother. And I said, yeah, I do, and so one thing led to another. He was able to open the doors. That's who I still today give my nod to and a respect to, Mr. Barry, retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife. He took me under his wing and showed me the ropes of the backcountry of the Arctic. And then after that, I was able to bring youth and vets into that space through his support and his help and his team with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And for the first 3 or 4 years, we did a lot of river trips, connect with indigenous communities. Again, through him, he created a bridge for me to connect to indigenous communities. And then after that, he just basically let me run. He said, you know what? I know exactly what your mission is. I know what you're trying to do, etc. You already know. Continue on and move forward, and for the greater good of the word. And so that's kind of like that background of how and why I keep on going to the Arctic. And going to the Arctic, yeah, it's the last place, man. I mean, it's less than 0.5% of world population get into a space like that, and it's wild. It's literally wild. And the atmosphere, it's crazy on the atmosphere. The lighting, during the summertime, it's sun, straight sunlight around you, and the sun just kind of hops around in a circle right above you, and then the nighttime, comes during the winter. And that's a whole different experience when you're doing deep winter expeditions up there, negative 80 below zero weather conditions, and it's just a different type of landscape that happens up there, but learning from the indigenous and how they able to adapt to the environment, and dealing with the harsh conditions, etc. But everything around there you can eat, believe it or not, you just need someone to show you what to eat basically. But everything, it's all this, it's the like the last of the last of the land of the United States, etc., that holds some of the most truest, deepest, purest of foods and resources and wildlife. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And it is definitely a perfect place to bring leaders in and groom leaders much more towards advocacy, because around my work is that I'm not teaching really leadership. What I'm teaching is how to use your experience and your skill sets and adapt them to the advocacy of what the Arctic Wildlife Refuge needs and the Gwich'in people, basically, and that's the importance of the pinnacle of my work is fostering leaders into advocacy leaders of the refuge and the Gwich'in people.
Yeah, and the first time that I got to talk to you, it was I got to see your passion for advocacy and what that means to you and the work that you do on Capitol Hill and the connections that you've made and the meetings that you set up. I think for us, like we see a lot of people. We did a survey a couple years ago, and in that survey, a lot of people indicated like we want to be great advocates, and a lot of people also indicated I don't know how. So
Right.
when you're looking into that space, could you maybe give us like an example of, we'll just talk about the issue that you just talked about, but like what that elevator pitch might look like just to begin having conversations, but then also maybe some structure around what's the best way to just jump in and start within advocacy within their local and regional and national circles.
Well, there's a couple things, through our process and the work I do. The most important thing is like, I got to get you into a space. I got to get you in. You got to become a witness. You can't advocate about this or that if you haven't become a witness. You haven't broke bread at the table, or you haven't spent time on the land and sweat a little bit and fall a couple times, etc. Because you got to do those things, right? I mean, when you do those things, you create these impacts of small memories within your system of your body, right? Your memory. And that right there is what creates strong advocacy, because now you're able to speak, having these like long engagements, sitting at the table with the chief, in a community, right? And not just being a witness, but also being able to engage with the chief and the community and sitting there and listening to what they are dealing with from a political standpoint, right? And so when you're able to extract that kind of information and then extract the same information how you're on the land, you start to create some really powerful tools of advocacy, and how you can raise that awareness. But to help raise that awareness of advocacy is that next step is basically, I think sometimes we can wear a lot of hats, right? And thinking like we're great at every hat. And what I say, understand your lane and which lane that you're in. Meaning
Yeah.
that um advocacy acquires specialists. It requires strategic process. We can say we're advocates in what we do, et cetera, and that's great, but if we're talking about really trying to be surgical and tactical and get within the political landscape, it's best to attach yourself to people that specialize in that and let them basically be able to bring you in that space, right? Some of that work you don't have to do. You already gained the knowledge, and that's important, right? But now it's time to marry with someone or an organization that actually do the spearheading and the groundbreaking and the fighting, like in Capitol Hill. When you can connect with them, they can insert you into those spaces, and that's where you can shine, and that's where you can bring your experience, your wisdom, your knowledge, and be able to help move the needle.
It's about collaboration. And I think like we're starting to see that with more and more nonprofits realizing like we're good at this one thing and we have a mission and it's very much in alignment with what is going on over here. Let's bring forces together and actually move some ground. Let's change.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it's about, collaboration, and I think it's to speak about collaboration from my experience as an entrepreneur, and I know for a fact that there's many of us out there that are leading teams and spearheading companies, et cetera, but there's this place where sometimes I'm going to say you probably find it much more in the younger entrepreneur mindset. There's this I got to do this, I got to do this, and that's kind of like a default of what happens. And the fact that I get it that you want to get all the credits, right? You want everybody to look at what you have accomplished, but you know what? If you can understand that the power of collaboration doesn't take you out of the equation, it actually thrusts you further as the tip of the spear. And it makes you a lot much more stronger and of a powerhouse instead of being an individual. And I think we tend to operate really silo with a lot of us different ideas and great, and it's beautiful out there. But if we're able to come together and be able to collaborate and build into what's happening, basically, it will not take us away from the light. It would only make us stronger.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. We just, Bianca from our team in Hunters of Color, we just went to a convening in DC with a group of like organizations, and we walked out of that just with, I think, a lot of gratitude and a lot of hope. And we felt that we had more power together 100%. So
yeah,
big fan of collaboration and partnering. So Kenny, favorite time of the podcast.
Yes. Speaking of collaboration, I know you work with a lot of brands and a lot of companies out there.
Yeah.
When you're going out to the Arctic, what's in the bag? What is the gear that you cannot go without?
The gear I cannot go without. Soft gear, gotta have my layers. You gotta have your layers. In the Arctic, the environment is completely a question mark. Summertime, and I would say I have experienced snow that drops down to like 20 to 15 degrees, and then 30 minutes later, it jumps up to 7 degrees, just like that. It's crazy. But layers you gotta have, of course. Sleeping bag at least a zero, believe it or not. I mean, even during summertime, a 0 degree sleeping bag. Just gotta have 4-season tent. Those things always weighs like an anchor though. But if you're able to find a really good tent that doesn't weigh that much, that'll be great. But it's good to have a 4-season tent. Double ply wall. Let me think here. Waterproof socks is great to have. When you walk in the tundra, it looks like a beautiful green carpet landscape from above or from photography. But when you're on the tundra, it does not operate like that. It's like walking on the waterbed, and it's pretty crazy. Let me think here. Of course, when it comes to, you want to call weapons, I always, it's a model that we, say in the military, with one is one is two is one. And so I always have a backup, 2 firearms, either, a regular handgun and then a shotgun or vice versa, basically. But I always go in with two, and bear spray at the same time. My protocols is bear spray first, and then I would revolt to, my firearm if it's necessary. But 99.9% of the time your bear spray is enough and it does the job of what you need it for it to do. So depends. It's like if I guess what else is in my bag. Food.
You are funny.
Dang it, it's snacks. Everybody has snacks. I never think about snacks. I forget about them. I knew it was coming.
Snacks. And then my comms. So, I'm always walking. Depends if I'm with the group or just a team, but I definitely have my comms. I have everything from 2-way radio to a sat phone, and also GPS, compass as well that I use as well, and then also I keep on a backup a regular compass. Period. With no batteries included. you and so those things happen. Technology can fail, but you can always fall back on your basics. And so. And I think also one of the biggest things in my bag, I do a lot of work with indigenous. I'll just share that I keep a collection of I would say spiritual ornaments that's been given to me by indigenous groups. It's kind of like a little bit oversized, large medicine bag that I keep with me. It's my protection. I guess hunters and anglers. We can depends on where you at, but you can find yourself, and there are spiritual spaces. When it comes to hunting, and fishing, and
Yeah.
and you're connecting with indigenous, etc. So I carry a lot of big belief systems that I've learned along the way of being with indigenous groups, that I do carry my version of medicine bags and my small rituals that I use to help protect and support myself. And inside it is herbs that's been given to me that helps me with my headaches or just bad coughs, etc. But a couple brothers, one of the brothers that I come to the Arctic with, that I bring to up there, he's indigenous, and he's also one of my security guys around the groups out there with me. But he's also a medicine man, and he's a member of the Mi'kmaq nation on the Canadian side. So I'm kind of lucky though, but he gives me certain herbs and teas and stuff that I keep, which is really cool to have. But yeah, that's just my personal thing. But that's a big piece in my bag, and everywhere I go, I keep it really, really close with me though. But yeah.
Yeah, I was most excited to hear your answer for that, because I know that the Arctic Circle is a lot different than what a lot of the folks that we have on experience, and we asked them like what's in their bag as well. So
Yeah.
that was incredible. So thanks so much for that. So we're about to wrap it up, but as part of the Unfiltered Outdoor podcast, we can't end without having Chad Brown's Unfiltered Outdoor Thought. It can be as hot of a take as you would like it to be. It could be around anything in the outdoors. But when you think about what's unfiltered in your mind towards the outdoors, what comes to your brain?
Depends on, I guess, outdoors and beyond, but it depends on, whatever you pursue, whether that's going after wildlife or just pursuing the outdoors, period. And whatever you inspire to be and want to do, not everybody is going to support you, and not everybody is going to be on your team, and not everybody's going to root you on. That's just the harsh reality of our humanity.
Yeah.
There's going to be a day that you're going to have to carry that torch for a very long time. And when you carry that torch for a very long time, you will question yourself, should you put this torch down? And some of us will, and some of us will continue to carry that torch. Depends on your situation and where you at in your life that will challenge you on should you put this torch down and should you carry this torch. And that's when you have to dig deep and understand to go the distance, and you can't expect everybody to go the distance with you. Um, and it's tough, it's hard, but there's always, depends on the duration and how long you're willing to sustain and carry that torch. There's always a light to it. And just understand that, that fight is not a fight that like you're in a boxing match. It's a fight with self. And it's a fight with, it's a mental fight, and it's something that we all have a duration, and we all going to say, I'm done. And the ones that are able to sustain is the ones that's able to see that light, and that's a hard walk. It's a hard walk, and it's a reality check for many, because there's a reason why you don't find a lot of entrepreneurs versus businesses out there, and not everybody's willing to take that walk. But taking that walk is, especially if it's a walk of the greater good, meaning that you're willing to walk and put yourself second and do it for others in the community. That's a higher level of vibration that's going to require you to step into, and not everybody has that ability to step into that kind of vibration. That vibration is only earned and it's not given, but it does exist. And I wish whoever's listening, I wish everyone to be able to seek out that level of vibration, because when you can attain that level of vibration, it becomes attractive, and you're not alone anymore.
Yeah.
And it thrusts you into a different platform where you become a magnet for the greater good, and it's a domino effect that helps others. And that's a different level of vibration that not everybody's able to obtain. And so I encourage everyone to strive for that on whatever level that you're at, and whatever you're trying to seek, is try to grab onto that level of vibration to be able to help support better our community in the outdoors. There's a lot of recreation, but there's not enough people that are operating on that vibration level to make those kind of changes. And that requires a very clear, focused, strategic, and tactical type of person to be able to live and move through different sectors of different industries beyond the outdoors, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And I'm already ready. I'm ready to log into loveisking.org and order my Carry the Torch t-shirt. So I'll be waiting for those to pop off. So if you've enjoyed the conversation we've had with Chad today, I know that I have. I've really felt like I've taken a lot from this conversation. So Chad, number one, appreciate you for being vulnerable, be fun, and teaching us, and when you're in the outdoors, you can never learn too much.
That's right.
And you brought us different perspective, and I appreciate that. So you can hop on and find Chad on Instagram at _ChadBrown_. Would love for you to give him a follow. If you haven't followed, liked, or subscribed to this podcast yet, we would love for you to do that. We're going to continue to have some incredible conversations. So we appreciate you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.